Selwyn here from WynnStrength.com. On this video, I wanted to talk about training at home considerations. We're living in a funny time now where we have a lot of shelter-in-place orders due to some virus. That's quite a serious deal. I would highly recommend not listening to people other than the CDC and official government officials, because that's probably where you're going to get some good scientific, data-driven recommendations. On that note, I will be talking about some training at home considerations for those of you who weren't fortunate enough or don't have the resources to have a garage or home gym in your own place, so you can't really get access to a gym. Ideally, the best time to build a home gym was 5 years ago, and unfortunately right now it's kind of getting hard to buy even basic equipment on Amazon or Walmart, because a lot of other people have a very similar idea where they're going out and buying literally whatever they can get their hands on or whatever's in stock in order to do some training at home, whether that be dumbbells, barbells, cheap benches, things of that nature. The one thing I would recommend is, if you don't plan on actually using that equipment for any time much after the shelter-in-place orders are over, when this whole thing is finished with, or when we can go back to our daily lives as we kind of used to know it, probably don't go out and purchase these equipment items, because they're going to be cheap. You're not really going to put any thought into them. If you're just buying it because it's in stock, it's probably not going to be the best equipment you want, or the equipment that you actually want or need. You might get your hands on like 5-pound dumbbells. If you're never going to use 5-pound dumbbells other than right now, just skip the purchase and try and make do with what you have around the house. Try and make do with your imagination and creativity in order to do something that looks somewhat similar to lifting something heavy and putting that up over your head. The other thing would be looking at the used market. Probably, again, not the best place. A lot of people are jacking up prices because loss of supply and demand and capitalism are probably falling in here, where things that shouldn't be as expensive as they are actually quite expensive, worth more than you should be paying, worth a lot less than what you would be paying for it if you were to buy it now. So again, probably not the best time to start a garage gym, but if you are able to find some equipment in stock, and if you were thinking about doing this in the long run, and you're just kind of using this as that change agent that would help to spark that move towards a garage gym, then yes, go for it. But make sure you're researching those products. Make sure you're buying something that you actually want and will use, made by a reputable company, and has some other users that are finding great value out of it. So the typical equipment manufacturer is going to be a great option here, provided they're in stock, and this is something you actually want to do in 5-10 years from now. If it's just something to get over the next 2 months, probably not the best and most effective use of your money and space, even if that's an option. So where does that bring us? There's a lot of people that are throwing out some training at home, some training with minimal equipment, training programs like that. This isn't going to be one of these videos. This is talking, I'll be talking more about the considerations you should be thinking about when training at home without equipment or with very minimal equipment. Just because I don't think it's that necessary to have a training program at this point in time, just because it is an unknown time scale. We're not like a 6-week program might be fine, or it might turn out to be 12, 16 weeks. Who knows? We're going to kind of play it by ear. So with that in mind, it's harder to gauge what you're going to be doing here, especially if you have unknown variables thrown into the mix. And really, this is a great time to maybe not have a structured training program that you're used to. Maybe it's a good time to play around with some other concepts and notions there. So again, a couple of these points may or may not be applicable to you depending on the amount of equipment you have available. So the first point I would say is to use this time to train some muscle groups or some movements that you don't typically train, isolation movements, things maybe bring up your weaknesses where you can't use a lot of weight. So just say you do only have access to a cheap pair of adjustable dumbbells that go up to say 40 pounds. You can use that to do some isolation work with your delts, some grip work. I would use it as a good time to train movements that don't require a lot of equipment. So ab movements are great. Think of grip training as well. You don't really need specific equipment. You could just use, say, a bucket filled with water, or if you have those 5-gallon jugs, throw those in there, wrap a towel around that. Everyone has towels. I hope everyone has towels. You can wrap towels around things, simply gripping. Look for whatever it is around the house you can hold on to, even a door frame, holding onto the edge of that door frame with your fingertips if possible, or like with assistance. Use your imagination. Try and work on different aspects of the grip that might be weakening, because you can really focus on that right now. Now's the perfect time to start training implements that you never really thought of. You could walk around. If you have a sledgehammer, there's some great sledgehammer videos. You can look at implements around the house that might allow you to get some sort of training stimulus for muscle groups and for movements that don't particularly get a lot of direct training. So grip work would be one. Ab and core work would be another one. Abs are great because you don't really need any equipment. The amount of movement you can do for the abs that don't require any equipment at all are like countless. You just go to YouTube and type in any just core movements, ab workouts. You're going to find thousands of videos out there, and you can do all of them without any equipment. And this might be the perfect time to bring up that core, because the core is actually really important. Obviously, it's at the core of every lift. It's a really important muscle to have trained. It's very central to lifting and making sure that you're able to lift those weights successfully. I've always talked about trying to push something with a wet piece of pasta. It's not going to work, but if you have that dry pasta, which is hopefully your core, that power transfer is going to be direct through. So if you can use this time to bring up that weakness, it might not be a weakness for you, but you can always get it stronger. And I don't think there's anybody out there that ever thought I have too strong of a core, whether that be the abs or the spinal erectors or the obliques. So that's all part of the core. So use your imagination, look up, do some research, find different ways to stress the core. That way you can use this time to target these weaknesses, because you can direct all of your training resources, all of your recovery resources to recovering from the extra stress that you're going to put on it. And by the end of this unknown time frame, you'll be able to come out the end and you might not have that squat might have decreased because you weren't able to train the squat as heavy or at all while in shelter in place, but at least you'll have this huge core that you'll be able to build up of it. And if you have that strong base layer coming into it, then that's going to take a while to decay. You're going to get weaker, but hopefully you're not going to all of a sudden be unable to squat what you were squatting. You won't be able to not squat at all. So you'll be able to squat some percentage of what you were squatting before this incident occurred. So you can train with that, build up with that with a stronger base, with a stronger core, and you should see some better results at the end of this. Some great movements I've been liking recently. I like the anti-movement ab movement. So things like ab wheel rollouts. If you don't have that, you can just do inchworms on the way down. Pile-off presses if you have a rubber band, or if you lie sideways and hold something, you can do it that way. Dragonfly, traverse crunches, where you're really moving, but you're wanting that core to stay locked in, because most other movements that we do, we're not wanting the core to move as much. We're wanting to move the rest of the body and make sure that core stays locked in and is as solid as possible. So if we train different movements that kind of emulate that, simulate that in some degree, that's going to have some good carryover, and that's going to be able to train you how to move whilst keeping that core as rigid as possible. The next point will be technique. If you do have access to very minimal equipment, just say you only have a barbell and 45-pound plates or 25-pound plates, whatever the case may be, even if you just have a PVC pipe, this would be a great time to do a deep dive on your technique for all the various lifts. So watch some videos. It's a great time to learn as well. I'll talk about that later. But in addition to learning, what you want to do is execute these movements. So watch a lot. You have a lot of time on your hands, I'm imagining. So you have a lot of time to research, learn about different squat techniques, high bar, low bar, where to put the legs, how to align the hips, how to align the knees, where everything should be moving, your foot balance, everything like that. And this is the perfect time to just drill in that perfect technique. Like they say, amateurs practice till they get it right, whereas professionals practice till they can't get it wrong. And even though you're not using a lot of weight, this is going to prime the body to prepare it for when the weights do get heavy. If you have 1,000 reps that are really light, that's still going to be better than doing nothing and coming back into training with a complete deterioration of the movement pattern. At least here, when you can deep dive on that technique, you're not just wanting to squat. Well, take the squat, for example. You're just not wanting to squat. You're wanting to look at different techniques that you might not have been focusing on in the past. So just say your knees caved in. during the squats in the past. Now you want to learn, how do I prevent that? And yes, the knees are going to really only cave in when the weight gets heavy, because form breaks down as weight increases and we approach those 95%, 90% and up intensities, as well as the RPE 9s and above. That's where the form starts to break down. But if we can practice what we should be doing with this really lightweight, then your body's going to remember that to some sort of degree, because you don't rise to the level of what you think you can do. We generally always fall back to our worst level of training. So if we're training technique, even though it is light, if we have that muscle memory of squatting this way, making sure we spread the floor, making sure we rotate our feet into the floor, it's just going to become habit. Just like you don't think about your drive to work every day unless something happens, then you have to remember where, like if there's roadworks in the way, you have to remember how to get around that. But for the most part, you go on autopilot when you go driving to work, and you kind of want that to happen when you're executing a squat. Much like a sport-specific skill, we practice as closely as we can to game day, but at the same time, we need to practice in a way that doesn't introduce external opponents. So we're not always, the best way to learn rugby isn't to continually play rugby. We need to develop skills like footwork, ball handling, how to tackle properly. And we do that in a controlled environment, so that when we do enter that chaotic environment of the sports field, then we can execute what we've learned to a degree in a much safer and more effective manner. So you want to think about that in this downtime, where we can really learn and hone in and sharpen that skill of movement and the skill of execution of that movement. Learn different ways. Some things are going to work, some things aren't going to work when you start stepping back under heavy weight, but at least you have that option, and you've gone through the motions, and you've learned a bit more about yourself, a bit more about how your body's going to move under some heavy load, even though that is simulated with some light load. Next thing we work on is speed work and plyometrics. This is, again, another thing that might not require any equipment at all. Things like jumping, clap push-ups, sprints, broad jumps, lunges, like hops, things of that nature, like anything that requires you to explode out. And it's also a good way to practice those movements, just because if you fall into the camp of conjugate style training, speed work is part of the picture and part of the training cycle, where you want to develop that speed work. You want to work on those fast twitch muscle fibers in order to drive some gains when the weight gets heavy. It'll enable you to apply more force to a heavy load, even though we're moving with lighter loads very quickly. And you might not, whether or not you believe that or whether or not you practice that, if you have no other option, then what are you going to do? I mean, you might as well go out and sprint uphill, jump up and down the driveway. You can literally do that without any equipment, and that's going to do some sort of stimulus for your body in order to help make sure that the decay of strength isn't as fast as it could normally be. And I think that's one of the things that you need to think about in this downtime, is how can I slow down the decay of strength? Because if we just sat there and did nothing, then that rate of decay is going to be fast, because there's no muscle stimulus, there's no training stimulus at all. And generally the body doesn't like to hold on to muscle because it's very inefficient. It's very caloric intensive. It's in a starvation, in a survivalist mode. It's not very good to have. Really, we want to be fat, because we can dig into those fat stores later on in life, and evolutionarily that's what we've been able to survive on. So when we think about that, we need to find ways to stimulate muscle, to stimulate the body, to realize that we shouldn't lose this as quickly as we normally could, because generally muscle is going to be the first thing to dissipate from the body when we're not training, because we don't need it, and it's very costly for the body to have in terms of a resource. And this follows through to, you could get into throwing stuff. Throwing stuff is good for the upper body. It works that speed as well. If you have a football, try and throw that. I mean, it's not for the purposes of developing strength. You're probably not going to be able to develop strength in this time, but you just really want to look at ways to stay active. If you have sandbags, you can throw them. You have bricks on a lawn and you don't care about ruining the lawn, or you just have dirt out there, throw that brick around. It's heavy, like shot put style, discus style, use your imagination, just hurl something heavy around, provided it's safe and won't damage anything. You're going to train a lot of muscles. You could do like a sandbag over that bar like they do in the strongman events. That's another thing, but with anything else that's heavy, buckets of water, throw those somehow. Use your imagination, use your creativity, but throw something and move fast. Look at ways that you can move fast around the environment you're in. And from there, we move to the total opposite end of the spectrum with isometric holds. So isometric holds, you're just holding a certain position for a given amount of time, such as a plank or like a push-up in any position that isn't you resting on the floor. You can do wall sits, you can do air squats that hold at certain different levels of angle of the hips. Deadlift, just bend over, hold a heavy book, hold a heavy something, and just bend over for a while. And what this does, again, it's going to mitigate that decay, that muscle decay, and hopefully hold on to as much strength as possible. And what the isometric holds can do is they can help you in certain sticking points. So just say with a quarter squat, just say with a squat, you get stuck a quarter of the way up, hold that for as long as you can, and then just hold it some more. If you're watching Netflix, just be weird. No one's in the house that cares. So just look weird and quarter squat in front of the TV for as long as you possibly can, or hold that plank with your iPad on the floor for as long as you possibly can. These don't really need a specific training time. If you're just watching, just do something like that. The same goes with stretching. If you want to stretch, watch TV and stretch. If you're on the computer, sit in a weird position, hold it for as long as you can. Try and work without your computer. Work on your computer without a chair. See if you can lift up that workstation and have a standing workstation. That's going to do something it's going to be better than sitting, I imagine. Next up would be GPP, general conditioning, cardio, things like that, where this is a great time if you've never done cardio in the past. I'm not a huge fan of cardio. I'm not a big fan of it, not really liking it. But it would be a perfect time to train some of that cardio, because if you don't have any equipment, you could just go for a walk. As long as you're socially isolated, you just by yourself, go out for a walk. If you have a big enough property, go for a walk around the property, walk around the house a couple of times. If you ideally do some sprints, do some interval training, sprint your driveway a couple of times and rest, sprint, rest, do that type of thing. Set a timer, just do some air jumps, then sprint, and then rest. Use your imagination. This is what this whole time frame can be used for, is just using your creativity, looking at the world in a different way, figuring out how to do certain things. But that will be one thing to do, is to just do some GPP prep training, cardio training, go for a hike if it's allowed in your area, go out in nature, breathe in the fresh air. The air is actually really fresh right now, surprisingly, because no one's driving anywhere. And if you don't want to do that typical style endurance, long, steady state cardio, look at doing things like HIIT, high intensity interval training, things like Tabata, 20 seconds on, 8 seconds off, 8 minutes, you're going to be dead. So you don't really need that much time, but all we have is time. So see how many times you can do that for, I guess. Another thing to do if you do have limited equipment is to do circuit training. Even with the body weight exercises that you can do, we're trying to look at ways that we can induce fatigue quicker. We're looking at ways that we can increase how quickly we're going to tire out, or ways to increase that mechanical disadvantage without weights. So for example, circuit training, you want to work your legs. So maybe you don't have any weight, so you want to do squats and then lunges right after that. You want to do them subsequently so that it's harder to do one and the other, and you keep doing that, you're fatiguing the muscle quicker than if all you did was squats and then all you did was lunges. And then look at different ways to do that. If you can do pistol squats, do pistol squats and then regular squats and then lunges, and then you'll see how difficult each set gets, because now we're adding in a new level of way to fatigue the body and way to fatigue the musculature. And that's going to be drive from, as well as cardiovascular endurance is going to be part of that, but you're going to have localized fatigue. Like a push-up, do as many push-ups as you can, and then change the angle on the door frame, work your way up, and then obviously the further up you go, the easier it's going to get, but hopefully your arms and chest are tight enough that feels difficult. So we're trying to look at different ways that we can make regular movements seem a lot more difficult than they should be. But circuit training is one way to achieve that goal. Change of speed for the video would be to use this time to learn and build up that knowledge base. Much like when you learn an instrument, you don't just learn the instrument, how to play it, you also have to learn some theory. When you do learn that theory, it takes you a little bit further than you could if all else being equal, all you did was play the instrument. When you play it, you obviously get the muscle memory, the connections as to how to use that coordination to play that instrument. But when you start looking at theory and start learning some more of the musical concepts behind the music that you play, it unlocks a whole new level of understanding and appreciation of the music. You learn things like timing, note structure, chords, scales, why things sound good in the order that they sound good in, why the scales are broken up in the way they are, why we have structure to songs, why we don't have structure to songs, all those different things add this deeper level of understanding to the simple act of, say, playing the guitar. Anyone can learn to play the guitar with enough time. The theory and the practical execution of instrument playing go hand in hand, and you get further along that path of excellence if you do know the theory behind it, as well as being a really proficient musician. So with that being said, the skill of lifting weights isn't simply a physical activity. There's a whole lot of science and knowledge and experience that comes behind that. So when you use this, look at this, all this free time we have, you can use this time to read books, watch YouTube channels, listen to podcasts, listen to some Audible audiobooks, things of that nature. You want to expand this level that it's not just a squat, it's the biomechanics behind the squat. What causes weak points in the squat? What are the sticking points in the squat? How to address those sticking points? If you have strong points, how do you emphasize that to help you for your best competitive advantage? How do you program? How do you create a program? What's the stress recovery adaptation cycle? What are the recent scientific papers regarding that? How about nutrition? What if you delve deep into that side of things as well? There's this almost infinite world of knowledge that spans so deep. There's biomechanics, there's the psychology behind lifting and high performance athletes. There's literally an infinity amount of things you can learn about the barbell sports that you shouldn't have a shortage of topics to look at. I would suggest starting with whatever will help you personally in the short to medium term. So maybe you do need to look at, how do I fix my squat? How do I fix my deadlift? What are some accessory movements I can do? And then from there, what type of programming should I be following? And not just what is the program, but why the program is built the way it is. Why do you structure a program in this way? What's the difference between block and conjugate? And why do we have a separation of those? And all that will go into making you a better athlete and a better trainee and just a better person as well, because you're expanding this level of knowledge and you're expanding your ability to critically look at the world around you, especially when it comes to, obviously, this topic of strength development and health and fitness. And personally, I don't think I would have come so far as a lifter if I didn't spend some time in learning the theory behind everything that I'm doing, or at least trying to learn everything behind the theory as to what I'm doing, because it's just this continual growth. And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know that much, but you have to get to that point where you're like, oh, there is so much behind this that I don't understand, but I need to at least attempt to understand 1% of it, so that that's better than 0%, and it will help unlock so many more. Everything else kind of starts to make sense once you unlock some key basic understandings and how to look. It'll give you a better lens as to how to look at training. And then what it also does is it helps improve your kind of BS radar. So when you learn certain things that are like based in science and based in research, you'll understand the difference between a person that has that scientific background and someone that has a marketing background. Because there are certain things that sound good, like in sales and marketing, but aren't necessarily correct in terms of what actually works and what's been proven by data. or it's been spun in a certain way that might lead you down a path that isn't exactly optimal or efficient or effective for you. So that's another benefit of this, of learning more and more, is that the more you learn, the more you're able to critically appraise the world that surrounds you. So that's going to wrap this video up. Hope it helps in some way, shape, or form, gives you a new mindset to look at these things. Again, not really a training program. I don't necessarily think it's helpful, but if it's something that you want to pursue, definitely look at there's some free training resources out there. I would definitely stick towards the free side of the at-home work templates, because we don't know how long this is going to last and how effective a paid program is going to be, given that there's an unknown time frame. We don't really have any way to progress or to scale things of that nature. But the more you learn, the more that'll make sense. This has been Selin from WynnStrength, and remember, a better life through strength.